Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on what time zone you're in. We are going to get going on our part 4 of a 6-part series of Azure webinars around, and today's topic is going to be Azure deployment models. So I'm going to start out today by explaining the different kinds of deployment models and why people are choosing them. What factors will go into the different deployment models and why people are looking at one or the other. A lot of times when we engage with clients and tell them about the different deployment models that are available through Azure, they always look and they say, well, we can do it a whole bunch of different ways. There's Azure Service Fabric, there's virtual machines, there's containers, there's app services. How do we know which one to pick when we're doing our different deployments? And the good part about them is they all basically will do the same thing, but depending on what you're trying to do, the applications you're trying to deploy, or sometimes security concerns or just the technologies that you're using, that's usually what will steer people to do the different models. And I'm not going to bore anybody with slides today. I'm going to try to go through a little bit of the different deployment models and then show you how the applications are deployed and why you might want to use them. So the first thing the 4 different deployment models that people are usually talking about are usually Azure Service Fabric, Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Containers, or Azure App Services. So the first one that I will start with is Azure Virtual Machines. And as you can see here, if anybody is familiar or not familiar, we have the Azure portal. And this is where your kind of command center of all the things that you're going to do inside of Azure. So the first deployment model that people will talk about is deploying to virtual machines. And this is also called Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. And this is the most basic deployment model that's out there. And it's what a lot of people understand because they've had servers in their data center, then they went to virtualization, so then they had virtual servers in their data center. Now, deploying to virtual machines in Azure is just deploying to other virtual machines that are running in Microsoft's data center. So it is a lot like whether you're deploying something on premises. You can deploy a Windows server. You can deploy a Windows server that has SQL Server installed on it. It's just a virtual machine that is out and it's running in the cloud. And so a lot of people will ask, why would I want to do deploy out virtual machines? There are some times when you deploy an application that is what we will say is very fragile or needs certain things installed on the virtual machine that may not be offered by other people. So deploying a virtual machine, you have the most control over your application and the machines, but with that, you have the most maintenance. When you deploy a virtual machine, you are in charge. Microsoft will take care of the networking. They'll make sure that the machine is up and running, it's on the network, it's accessible. And then from there, you will have to, then Microsoft will also take care of the storage in terms of Azure, but you will have to take care of the operating system. You'll have to run all the patches on it. Any changes that you make to the virtual machine, you're on the hook for those. So you get a lot of control, but with a lot of control, you still have to do the maintenance that's normally done with any virtual machine as you have running on your on-premises data center. So what I'm going to do here is start out with the first deployment model and show you how easily you can spin up a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure. So on the left-hand panel here, we're going to select virtual machines. And as you can see here, I have a a couple of virtual machines that are out here running now. So we're going to click Add. And what Azure will do is going to walk you through a step-by-step process of setting up a virtual machine. So the first thing that it's asking me is, which subscription do I want to deploy this to? And I'm taking for granted that everybody has talked or been to our other earlier demos where we explain subscription management and Azure resources. So we're going to put this into the new hire training subscription. We're going to create a new resource group. A resource group is just a logical grouping of applications. So we're going to call this one SLG Talon Demo. And I typed in the resource group name that I'm looking for. There's a green check mark over here that says that it's available and it's ready to go. So I'm just going to click OK. Virtual machine name, I'm going to say SLG Demo VM. And once again over here, it's doing some checks to make sure that that name is available. These names have to be unique across all of Azure because these machines will be referenced by these names further on. So we'll just install this one. Since I'm on the East Coast, we're going to install it in the East US Data Center. I'm just going to leave the availability options as it is there. We're going to let's install a Windows Server 2016 Data Center version. And as you can see here, you can pick from a bunch of different images for virtual machines. You could install an Ubuntu server, a Red Hat Linux, CentOS, Windows Server, Windows 10. You can install any one of these. It's going to give you the latest build of whichever server thing that you pick. So we're going to say, let's do Windows Server 2016 Data Center. I'm going to say, I'm going to make it a one virtual CPU, 3.5 gigabytes of memory. If you wanted to change the size of this machine, we can easily click on change size. And it'll bring up all of the different options that Microsoft allows you to create virtual machines. So what we're looking at here is our virtual machine size, and this is just a name of how Microsoft describes it. The offering, the family that they're in, virtual CPUs, RAM, data disks, IOPS. IOPS is Microsoft's version of kind of the transactions per second, or how fast the virtual machine can run and read and write from the disks. Temporary storage, whether or not premium disks are supported. For a lot of virtual machines, premium disks is going to get you more IOPS and get you a better result. But with the premium disk, you're paying more money for them. And then the estimated cost per month. So like I said, I'm going to spin up this DS1 B2. It's one virtual CPU, 3.5 gigs of memory, and it's going to cost me roughly $93 a month. So I'm going to select that. And when you spin up the virtual machine, they're looking for you to put in a username and a password that is going to be the administrator account on this machine. So I will say dfluid Talon. Put in my username and password. Now, one of the things that it's asking about here is inbound port rules. And when you are creating a virtual machine, you can tell it what ports to open and close on the virtual machine. So just to start out, I'm going to keep all of the public ports closed, so we're not going to open any ports. And then the last thing that we have here is a way for you to save money. If you have if you have software assurance, you have Azure hybrid benefits, you can bring your own license. And by bringing your own license, you're not going to pay for the Windows license in the monthly cost that was shown up here in the size. When you're building one of these machines, you don't have to have licenses. The licensing cost is built into the hourly charge. If you have your own license, Microsoft will drop down that price, and you're not paying for the licensing in there since you're bringing your own. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to say that no, I don't have a Windows license. So the next thing that we're going to do, now that we've started to create the virtual machine, we're going to tell it how many disks we want on it. So the next piece is we're going to say that I just want a standard hard drive on it, and I'm going to create one more disk that is a standard hard drive. It's 1 gig and just a very simple disk. So now we've gone through, we've set up the things for the virtual machine. Now we're saying it's going to have a C drive. It's also going to have another disk attached to it. We're going to move next on to the networking. So next, when we go into the networking, when you create a virtual machine, it's going to put it on a virtual network inside of Azure. So we're going to say create it on the SLG Telon Demo VNet. We're going to put it on the default subnet. We're going to have a public IP for it, basic network security groups, and again, we're going to leave no inbound ports open on this one. We're going to leave the defaults for accelerated networking, and then for load balancing, you can, if we were to create multiple machines that we'd like to load balance together, we can do this, and Microsoft and Azure will take care of the load balancing of the traffic across the machines. So we're going to click Next here and go through. So we can, when you're creating the virtual machine, by default, the boot diagnostics monitoring is on, OS guest diagnostics is off. All of these monitoring and logging is going to go to a storage account. So a storage account, if you're not familiar with it, you can just think of it as a file share that's sitting out somewhere. So Azure is collecting logs on this and putting it into a storage account that we can then log into and then see the stuff that's going on in there. Where we're going to leave assigned management identity off, enable auto shutdown. So auto shutdown is something that you can use to help save yourself money. This is particularly useful in dev test environments, or if you're doing a proof of concept or something where you don't need the virtual machine to be running all the time. You can shut it down, and this works only with virtual machines. It doesn't work with a lot of the platform services, but you'll pay for only the time that the machine is up and running. So the cost that we saw back a couple screens ago said that it was going to cost $94 a month. If we enabled auto shutdown, and we say yes, and I want it to shut down at 7 o'clock every night. And so at 7 o'clock, this machine is going to shut down. Microsoft will stop charging you for the compute on that machine, and it'll just be paying for the storage of the disk on in the storage account. And when people will ask a lot is, you know, what is the real costs when you're building virtual machines? And the highest cost is the compute of the virtual machine. And when I say compute, I mean the machine that is up and running, that the disks are spinning on it. And then the next highest is usually network traffic in and out, or network traffic out, and then the last is storage. And so we're going to say shut this down every night at 7 o'clock. And then we're going, here, if you want, right from the beginning, you can enable backup on it so that you can back up the machine, a daily policy, however you want to set it up. But for now, I'm just going to say no. The next part is if you want to have any external extensions installed when the machine starts up for the first time, you can go in and install things that when the machine starts up, it will go and install different software packages, whatever you pick. I'm going to ignore that and not install anything. So the next is tags, and we can go in, and tags are just a name value pair that allows you to categorize your resources, and it allows you to for lack of a better term, tag different things so that you know whose stuff is who and what is what. And so for right now, you don't need to tag anything. We're just going to ignore the tags, but a lot of times people will use tagging to be able to look at consolidated billing. They'll want to see, how much are the machines that the finance department is using. So they'll tag the machines that finance is using with finance, and then they'll be able to go and do some cost lookups by those tags. So next, we're going to say review and create. And this is pretty much just a review of the steps that we walked through. And as you see here, it's going back through with, it's going to cost about 12.5 cents an hour. And for the month, that will be 760 times 0.26. Comes out to the $95 that it showed us. Going through just the basics of the machine, the disk, the networking, the management, and we're going to say create. So one of the things that is shown right here now that I just clicked it is there is a download template for automation. So right now we went through the editor to go and build out the machine. You also can download these machines as scripts. So if you wanted to say, hey, each time that we create a new machine, I want the Talon version of this machine. I want it always to look like the one that I just had. You can download a script and kind of stamp those machines out one by one with a script. So this is going to take a couple of minutes to deploy a virtual machine. And while this is deploying, I'm going to start to talk about the next deployment model. And the next one that I'm going to talk about is Azure App Services. And this whole thing will keep running in the background, and I'll have notifications of what's going on during the deployment process. So while that's going, I'm going to go back to all resources. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is Azure App Services. And the way that I've heard it explained the best that you can associate an app service is almost like IIS in a box. People will go and deploy web applications and deploy logic apps and deploy different applications, API apps out. And an Azure App Service is kind of like an IIS server that is up and running for you. And so when we were talking before, we were talking about virtual machines. When we get into Azure App Services, virtual machines is infrastructure as a service. Azure App Services is platform as a service. And when we talk about platform as a service, it's a little bit different in that behind the scenes, there really are virtual machines running there, but you don't ever log into them. You kind of don't care about them. They're a black box for you. So when an app service is exposed to you, you know that behind the scenes somewhere there's a virtual machine running. But with the app service, Microsoft will take care of the networking, the storage, the creation of the machine, the patching of the machine. So it'll get all the Windows updates. It'll have all the antivirus. It'll have all of that on there. and you're just going and deploying your application to it. So there's a little bit less control, but there's a whole lot less maintenance to do. You don't have to worry about patching up a machine. You don't have to worry about updating antivirus. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just go deploy your web application, and it will just be up there running for you. So while this is deploying, I'm going to go through the next part and create a new app service for you. So we'll click on Add. And we'll app service. Having a little, let's see if we can get this to go a little bit quicker here. We'll click on App Services. And as this is going, we can look down here and see that our deployment for our virtual machine is still running. So we're in the app services. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so app services deployed out here. We're going to deploy a new one. So we're going to say Add. And here, this is going, all of the different kinds of app services or web apps that we can deploy. So what I'm going to go through is show you a very simple web app, but you could also deploy a web app with SQL Server, app services environment. If anybody is looking for a WordPress site running on Linux, you can go through and install a WordPress site. It will spin up a Linux virtual machine behind the scenes. It will install WordPress for you, have all of those things. So a lot of these things are different companies that have their software product, and it's built into the fabric of Azure that's saying, hey, instead of getting a virtual machine and installing all of this stuff on here, we're going to spin you up a WordPress site behind the scenes, and you're just going to have to worry about the WordPress. You're not going to have to worry about the virtual machines or anything behind it. Same thing with Joomla, Orchard CMS, all of these different things we can do. So just for simple purposes, we're going to talk about a web app, and we're going to click Create. And here, this is another thing that it's going to walk us through a little bit of a wizard, and this one is only a one-page wizard, so we're going to say SLG app service. And then as you can see here, it's a name that's available. And if you can see here, it's going to address this application by slgappservice.azurewebsites.net. We're going to put it into the new hire subscription. We're going to put it into the resource group that I just created before, so that all these resources will be together. And the OS behind the scenes, I would like a Windows OS, and publish the code. App service plan is the different pricing for app services. So we're gonna put it into the training app service, and we're going to use application insights to do some monitoring on here. And we're going to say create. And then behind the scenes, this is going to start to spin up a spin up a app service behind the scenes. And as we look back here, our deployment for our Windows virtual machine finished just in time. So we're going to say, go to this resource. Well, this is the virtual machine that we just started to spin up about 3 or 4 minutes ago. And we see the SLG demo. It's in the new hire subscription. It's all configured and ready to go. So I'm going to click on Connect for this. It's going to give me an RDP file to remote into this. So we will click on it. And connect. And I'm expecting this to fail. And the reason why I'm expecting it to fail is because when we created the virtual machine, we didn't open up any inbound ports. So that's just telling me that, hey, I'm secure. I can't get into port 3389 because I didn't open those up when I created the virtual machine. So everything worked as planned. So now we can go into and here we're going in and saying that we want to add an inbound port rule. And I'm going to say source any, and we're just going to open up and here it's telling me that RDP port 3389 is exposed to the internet. This is only recommended for testing. For production environments, we recommend using a VPN or a private connection. And I'm okay with that because normally on a machine, you just wouldn't want to set your 3389 to let anybody start to RDP in, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to open this up. So it's going and it's creating a new security rule. And now if I come back here, I'm going to try and connect again, download the RDP file. And I'm not sure if it's going to take this fast or not. So we'll cancel that one out and keep on moving on. So now we're going back to look at so we had our virtual machine that was deployed, we had our app service that's deployed. So here we're going to go to this resource. And see that the app service was deployed. Right now, I don't have a website or anything running on there, so it's going to give me a very generic page of what's happening out there. But as we can see, it was slgappservice.azurewebsites.net, and it's telling me that my app service is up and running. If I had deployed a web application here, then we would be able to see that web application. So one of the things that I wanted to point out before we get into the next two deployment models that we're going to talk about is you can see how fast and how easy it was to spin up a virtual machine and spin up an app service inside of Azure. These are great for production type of applications, but they're also great if you want to do something that you're trying to do a quick proof of concept, or you'd like to do a demo of somewhere. And a lot of times when you try to do something new, depending on where you work and how the IT department is. I know that there's some clients that we work with that if you ask for a virtual machine, it could be, 6 weeks until you get a virtual machine that's spun up and running for you. And in times when you want to get something done quick and you want to do a POC to show somebody to move on to a real project, you can go into Azure, spin up a virtual machine, and we've only been on for half an hour right now, and we've already spun up a virtual machine that we're able to work with. We've also been able to deploy a web application. So it's something that you can do relatively quickly and securely and get things up and running fast. So with these two, the next deployment model that we would like to talk to that gets in a little bit deeper into the inner workings of Azure is Azure Service Fabric deployment. And Azure Service Fabric it's kind of a weird thing to explain. Azure Service Fabric, when you deploy something to that, you can deploy web applications, you can deploy different things, and it is the inner workings of Azure. So Azure Service Fabric, if you've ever used Azure SQL databases, which is the database as a service that runs on platform services, that runs on Azure Service Fabric. So when Microsoft created Service Fabric, it's a lot of the things that run on Azure all run on Service Fabric. And then Microsoft was able to expose Service Fabric so that you can have a lot more control over the applications that you're deploying out with Service Fabric. And a lot of people that are deploying Service Fabric are deploying them for cloud native microservices. They want things that are very, very highly scalable, very controllable, and working only in the cloud. So virtual machines, you could run those in the cloud. You could run them on premises. When we looked at app services, you can run app services only in the cloud, but you can run IaaS on premises. When you start to run things in Service Fabric, these are cloud native applications. So it's something that most of the time when people are looking to do things in Service Fabric, they're looking for something that is super highly scalable and it's usually a lot of times built around microservices. So when a lot of people will talk about a shopping cart type of application, or if you're writing something that is reaching out to constituents around voting time, this is something that you would probably want to run in Service Fabric, something that's going to get hit a lot and that needs to scale independently. When people will talk about shopping carts, they'll have different things that they'll want to scale. They'll want to scale the website. They'll want to scale payment processing differently from the website. They want to scale credit card processing. So all of those microservices can be scaled independently when you start to talk about Azure Service Fabric. So the last deployment model that we're going to talk about is the magic of containerization. And so when people will talk about containerization, a lot of people have worked with Docker containers. There's also, with Windows 2016, there's the Windows container. So you can have those that work on premises and work in virtual machines. And you can also spin up containers inside of Azure. So a lot of people will ask, why would I want to containerize something? And a lot of times when you have a container, it does exactly what it's saying. It's containing all of the stuff inside of your application. So there's sometimes when you want to deploy an application and you say, should I do it as an app service, or should I do it as a container, or should I do it as a VM? Your VM is going to be the one with the most control, the most work for you behind the scenes, and probably one of the higher costs. The next one down is probably containerization, where you have a little bit more control than, or you have a lot more control than an app service, but not quite as much control as a virtual machine. And you can containerize your whole application, and that container will house all of your applications, so you can keep all your configurations in there, and you have a little bit more control on what's running behind the scenes, opposed to an app service where you just have a few different things that you can work behind the scenes. Like I will bring it up here. So inside of here, you can go in, and there's the application settings, which are a lot of things like you would see in a Internet Information Server. You know, you can see your application settings. Do you want it run in the .NET framework, PHP version? So you can do a little bit of configuration change in here. But if you have an application, we've been to different clients where they say, our application will only run on Windows Update with KB 587243, and when we go beyond that one, the whole thing breaks. Well, that's not a good application to put into an application service. That sounds like a great one that would work well on a virtual machine, because you can control the updates that you're putting on there, and where you're not controlling them inside of an app service. And so with containers, you can go in and easily set up some of these things a little bit more than this, a little bit less than app services. So the next piece I'm going to jump back to app services again. And when people will talk about the different things inside of app services and some of the things in platform services, that a lot of times they'll talk about web applications that are just like the web app that we have running up here. There is also a newer thing inside of Azure called logic apps. And these are a very kind of mid to lightweight version of a rules engine, is the easiest way that we can talk about it. So we can go and deploy a logic app, and logic apps are, step through these things logically, and along the way, let's have it do different things. So we can talk about deploying a logic app that is existing. We're going to say G Talon demo and create. Now we're deploying an application that's going to run out in the cloud, and we can go and start to add different workflows for this. In the essence of time, I'm not going to have enough to go and show you, but you can go through and see different applications that, if you wanted to do something, and a lot of times logic apps are great for, if you need to take something, process a file, insert the data into a database, send an email. Throughout the logic app designer, you can go and put all of those steps in there and say, when a message is received on the bus queue, then do something. When a tweet is posted, like let's watch this Twitter account. When a tweet is posted, let's do something. This is one thing that has been used a lot in the state and local government and even federal government, of let's watch some tweets. And if somebody is talking bad about, I had a horrible experience at my voting station. You can write a logic app that will be looking for tweets about either the place that you were at or the handle name, And as people are going through, they're starting to tweet and they're posting things about good or bad experiences. They have logic apps behind the scenes that are watching those Twitter feeds and logging all of this, and maybe, you know, calling that person back and saying, you know, what was so bad about your experience, or, you know, customer service type of things that, you know, I had a terrible experience at Target. Target is always looking at Twitter feeds, and, you know, they'll get right back with that person saying, you know, how can we help you? Here's a coupon for your next visit. So all of these different things are built into logic apps for you to do by yourself. So you don't really have to write any code. You can say that when a message is received to the service bus queue, then go through and create and go through and start to do some different pieces of your workflow. I'm not sure why this isn't working, but we'll jump back here. So with all of the logic apps, it's a lot of drag and drop and configuration of things happening. So as you start to create things, you can create some pretty powerful applications without writing a whole lot of code behind the scenes. And these flows can be manipulated and changed throughout the day. If anybody has ever worked on the Office 365 side with Microsoft Flow, that is a lighter weight version of Logic Apps. So you can do some pretty extensible things really quickly. So the next thing that people will do a lot on the app services side is they'll talk about serverless compute and Azure Functions. So Azure Functions is another piece of Azure that's in there that does a lot, that can be a very highly scalable solution, and it is something that is very particular into what you're looking to do. When you talk about functions, you have to talk about something that has no state at all. You can think of it as almost, you call it, it spins up, it does its work, and then it dies. So if you have something that is very stateful, meaning it needs some parameters from the last run that it had, or it needs to save some parameters for the next run, Azure Functions are usually not a good choice for you, but they're something that can go in, that are short-lived calculations or short-lived processes that will go in. And the great part about Azure Functions is they can fan out and they're super highly scalable. We've done some applications where there was an application that was doing, reading in 1 million lines of a file and doing a calculation on each of those files, and then spitting out the result, recompiling the result, and then giving a whole result on the 1 million rows. Well, when we went in and looked at it, we had some stuff that was running, and the things would run for 4 and 5 hours to process the 1 million lines of the file. When we added it to Azure Functions, it would start up, and since each row had nothing to do with the row before it or the row after it, and it just needed to provide some calculations on it, we were able to use Azure Functions and fan those calculations out. So it started hundreds of threads of calculations, and we were able to get the processing time down from 4 hours to less than an hour. So Azure Functions are something that are highly scalable. Again, it's something that you don't have to worry about the virtual machines or anything running behind the scenes. You can just create a function and have it do its thing, feed data into it, spits data back out to you. Very highly scalable, very, very useful. And then the last one that people usually use on the app service side is web jobs. And so we'll get into web jobs. And when people will deploy things as web jobs, these are typically things that used to run as Windows services on a machine that are something that is spun up. It's a little bit longer lived than functions, but they're typically things that were running either as SQL Server jobs or running as Windows services. And this is the platform services equivalent of a Windows service that was running on a virtual machine. So that wraps up all of the pieces of app services. So I just want to do a quick review. We're right at about a time here at 1:45. So what we talked about today, we went through and had all of we talked about a few different deployment models that are inside of Azure. And the first one that we talked about was deploying virtual machines out. Deploying virtual machines is a lot like probably your current data center right now. It's just a virtual machine. Instead of running in your data center or in some co-location, it's a virtual machine that is running out in Azure, in Microsoft's data center. One thing I forgot to add before is when you're creating those networks and creating the machines inside of Azure, you can have connectivity back to your data center, much like your data center would be connected to a co-location. You can do all of that inside of virtual machines. So the next thing that we talked about was Azure App Services, and this is where we jumped into platform services. You're not responsible for taking care of the machines behind the scenes. The great thing about those is you're only worried about your application that's running on it and the data that your application is using. You don't have to worry about deploying virtual machines, deploying patches, deploying any updates, virus protection. Microsoft takes care of all of that. A little bit less control than you have over virtual machine, a lot less in terms of pricing. The next piece that we talked about was Azure Service Fabric. Azure Service Fabric is the fabric that all of Azure runs on. It's very highly scalable. It gives you a lot of control. With the control, and it also will be usually a little bit more pricey than the first two options that we talked about. And when people use Service Fabric, it's usually for super highly scalable applications that you're writing. If you have a web app that is getting, 200, 300, 400 visitors a day, it doesn't make any sense to put it on app services, on Service Fabric. There's just not enough. When you start to talk about the millions of transactions or hundreds of thousands and millions of transactions a minute or a day, then that's where you can start to look into Service Fabric, break your pieces up into microservices, and Service Fabric is a great option. The last option that we talked about was Azure Containers. And containerization is something that is kind of a middle ground in between virtual machines and app services. It gives you a little bit more control, and it's a great option if you need a little bit more control and your application may be running on premises today, and it will require too many changes to make it run in a app service. Usually containerization will make you make less changes, and you'll be able to get your applications running up in the cloud. So with that, we talked about, as I said, we talked about virtual machines, app services, Service Fabric, and containerization. And those are the four most common deployment models inside of Azure today. So we have about 10 minutes left. I will stop and open it up to any questions. And if anybody has any questions, you can type them into the message window and I will be able to get them and answer them. So I'll open it up to any questions. Okay, I haven't seen any questions, so I think that we can wrap it up now. Again, my name is Dan Fluitt. and I am the Vice President of Talon's cloud practice. We cover anything, my team will cover anything Azure Office 365. If you have any questions or would like anything further beyond this webinar, please feel free to reach out to events@talon.com, and that will be attributed to this event. One of the things that we are offering right now with Microsoft funding is we come in and do an Azure assessment, and a lot of those are people that are looking to go to the cloud and they're not quite even sure where to start. And we can come in and it's a lot of an education session. The next type of assessment that we do is somebody has an application, they go, hey, we really like to run this in the cloud. Can you help us out? We're not sure what we need to do. So that's for the kind of 2.0 version of cloud people that understand Azure, understand what's going on, and now we want to move this application out there. And then the last type of assessment that we do is a lot of people, the go-getters, have stuff deployed out to Azure already. And we get a lot of questions like, it's out there, it works, but did I do it correctly? Is it secure? Is it done to best practices? So that's the third flavor of our Azure assessment. And a lot of it is, what do you have today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? Here's your plan to get there. So those are the three types of assessments that we can use to help you out. So I don't see any questions, so I will wrap it up. Thank you very much and have a nice day. And be sure to tune in. There will be two more webinars in this series to finish up the state and local government Azure webinar series. Thank you, everybody.